Hello, my name is Brant Hunt. This is my third recording tonight, reading from the Redemption Manual 4.5. So I'm going to be reading about sovereignty tonight. Again, this will be my third video of sharing what I'm reading from this particular book called the Redemption Manual 4.5. Again, today is the 11th day of December 2022. So here we go. So on the subject of sovereignty, since 1933, you and all other walks of life, including the so-called Americans, have been pledged for the debt of the social compact or constructs known as the United States in all caps, to which people have been deluded into believing that they owe some allegiance to such by and through which debts alleged, to be owed to international bankers, most of whom are foreign to our conditions or implied as so by and through the education which we receive within the constructs of control. Your credit, labor, productivity, and property have been used and are now being used as collateral by the Incorporated United States of America, all caps, without your knowledge or consent. This is legal until you take back your implied consent by a special lawful process. And this is what this book is all about, a redemption manual. In other words, you're redeeming yourself. If you think about this in a spiritual sense, is that what Jesus supposedly did on the cross is that he redeemed himself. And is a witness to basically to redeem others. Anyway, so you're a shadow. So here we are. In fact, you are unknowingly volunteering to be chattel for your mortgage held by financiers from the founding of this nation. Perhaps you infer that the name on the tax statement is yours, and so you respond as though it were. This is volunteer servitude. Again, remember that this is, I want you to understand this. The all caps, all capitalization of your name, your letters, is a fiction. That's not the real you. That's your straw man. You have been deceived by these people. And your parents have been deceived. And also your grandparents. How this was done piecemeal by piecemeal, gradualism, and how they fleeced the people. So this is volunteer servitude. To make the servitude legal, it was necessary to cut a hole in the fence. No matter that the escape route is hidden, obscured by legal brambles, B-R-A-M-B-L-E-S, brambles that make escape difficult. This is not presumed consent. It is not impossible, just seemingly difficult and even impossible. Your state of fact as a subject is based upon a presumption that if you did not wish to be so encumbered, you would use whatever law to do something about it, as long as you do not use the escape route provided by such law that may be available. It is presumed that you are content to remain in the pasture and be milked and used as chattel. This word has the same root as the word cattle. Do you get the picture? Can such a premise be true? It seems totally out of step with everything you and I have ever known about our so-called world, our so-called nation, and our so-called government, and our so-called relation to it. Our parents never behaved as though they were being chattel. They dutifully paid their so-called taxes, voted in so-called elections, and waved a so-called American flag on the 4th of July. Our so-called teachers taught us about our history, our allegedly so-called Declaration of Independence, and our so-called Constitution, and our so-called Revolutionary War. How we fought the greatest army and navy the world has ever seen at the time. Nowhere in our so-called history classes did we encounter any such premise of subjection to a so-called central government that rules our very lives in every moment. Our so-called civics teachers never told us anything about this. Nothing in our so-called world even hinted that we were subjects to a highly centralized government. And folks, let me explain to you, it's not just here in the United States. It's all over the world that people have been seduced. Surely this could not be true of other peoples, and surely we would not subject ourselves. For most people, this cannot be. The truth cannot be heard because it is too discordant with people's entire experience. They can't handle it. It's dissonance. It doesn't work with them. And yet we can document that Mr. George Washington did not chop down a cherry tree. Mr. Abraham did not free the slaves. They became subjects of the federal district, that is the District of Columbia. The war with Mexico was begun by a general, that is Mr. Zachary Taylor. Propagations along the Nueces River, the battleship Maine blew up from the inside. Mr. Woodrow Wilson knew that the ship known as the Lusitania was carrying United States munitions, that is weapons, to the war in Europe and would be sunk. Mr. Franklin Delano Roosevelt had maneuvered the Japanese by an ongoing oil embargo around Japan a year earlier, which led to the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor to guarantee success, and had cut fuel supplies to the Pacific Fleet to ensure the presence of enough old ships to offer a tempting target at Pearl Harbor. Mr. Harry Truman knew that there were other good alternates to an invasion of Japan and did not need to drop the atomic bomb on Hiroshima or Nagasaki. Mr. Franklin Delano Roosevelt knew about the Nazi concentration camps. Mr. Lyndon B. Johnson knew that there were no attacks on the ships, the Maddox and Turner Joy in the Gulf of Tonkin, when he asked for a congressional resolution to attack North Vietnam. And the so-called military social government construct known as the United States has been warned by numerous documented sources that there would be an attack on the World Trade Center in New York and the military compound known as the Pentagon. All of this is from documented historical sources, yet we continue to believe the myths that are in their histories, their movies, their mainstream media, and their mass consciousness. Mr. John Fitzgerald Kennedy warned us, saying, "The greatest enemy of the truth is very often not the lie, deliberately contrived and dishonest, but the myth, persistent, persuasive, and realistic." That's the problem. We are living in a myth, folks. We're not living in reality. You will probably find it hard to accept that you have been living in an illusion for your whole life. Much of what you believe is illusion, and you will only find your freedom when you can allow yourself to look behind the veil of illusions. An example would be a movie. We're not in Kansas anymore. Yellow Brick Road. Anyway. Who, WHO capitalized, who you are is far greater than what you perceive yourself to be. When you have the courage to stand face to face with the illusion and call it what it is, you will have stepped through the most difficult task set before you on your Earth's journey. There is a way out, but the only way out is through understanding how we came to this predicament and by following your precise formula to attain your sovereignty from the illusion. We have been warned repeatedly throughout their history but we weren't listening very closely, were we? Now we might have one more chance to take back our power and our sovereignty from those who seek to control through the creative rewriting of history, all people as subjects. We're in the predicament because we have failed to accept liability of self-government in support of international public order by emerging into a political status that allows us to freely determine our own futures that are established not only for ourselves but for our posterity. All our life, we've looked for the roots of war, injustice, and oppression because if we can find the basis of the rampant injustice in the world, we could relieve enormous struggle and suffering. We wondered at how little the so-called Constitution seemed to affect the courts and how often the truth was buried in silence. Mostly we saw greed and heartlessness in a power struggle played out in politics. But we didn't realize that the game had been played in secret throughout our own history. And ultimately, it is a game of monetary policy and politics with a spiritual component, plus the true hidden knowledge that the documentary evidence and principle application as to how rights and privileges of immunities are established or enforced are never revealed to the people by and through the system of educational institutions, not for their benefit, but for the sole, S-O-L-E, and express benefit to keep control of all people through such centers of education from womb to tomb. Like you, we watched and participated in the so-called historical illusionary scene for many years, whether you call it American or such other name, or such other name wherever such constructs exist. Many have written letters to the so-called editor, congressmen, senators, and presidents to try to get the so-called government to answer questions about the origin of authority to rape, pillage, plunder, and outright murder the people throughout this country. We have been educated to believe we had a right to question authority for. If we did not, we would end up with the despotic tyranny. Well, after all this, the question remains, now what do I do? So I wanted to share this again for this particular book, Redemption Manual 4.5 edition. And we'll do another recording of this in the near future. Thank you for listening, and have a good night.